God of War is always impressed when it comes to presentation, and after squeezing every last ounce of power out of the PlayStation 2, its sequel would hit the PlayStation 3 and produce one of the finest looking games of its generation. Picking up right after the events of the second game, you once again step into the role of Kratos, as you take the fight to the gods themselves, and within seconds of beginning you're thrown straight into the action. At its core, it's extremely similar to the two previous games. With Kratos being the God of War, you've got plenty of available attacks and new weapons to find throughout the adventure. Now, the best way to describe it would be that it's the perfect blend of fighting, platforming and puzzle solving, and with the combat being fast, furious and brutal, you'll have no problem racking up high combos which really help you get creative with your approach. From melee attacks to magic and quick time finishes, it's an absolute gore fest, which is only bolstered by the game's incredible art design and attention to detail. First off, Kratos himself is masterfully rendered. From his facial expressions to the animation of his moves, it's clear a lot of care went into realizing this version of him, and the same can be said about the range of different enemies and bosses that make up some of the best set pieces in the series by far. Of course, the various locations that make up the game as well are beautifully realized, from the heights of Mount Olympus to the fiery depths of the underworld, and every new environment you encounter comes along with a sense of grandeur you don't often find with similar games of its kind. So if you never got around to playing it, it's just as enjoyable now as it was all those years ago. Journey was one of the most unique games that ever hit the PlayStation 3, and much like its name suggests, it's about traveling from A to B with much more of a focus on the experience between those 2 points. At the beginning, you're literally thrown into the deep end with no clear objectives or information about what to do, and I feel this aspect of the game will really help immerse you in the adventure as you slowly begin to figure out the several ways you can reach the ominous mountain that forever lingers in the distance. Now, the simple control scheme makes Journey incredibly easy to interact with, and the fact that sliding around in the sand and floating around in mid-air is such a joyful experience means it's not only easy to interact with, but a hell of a lot of fun to play. It goes without saying that graphics and music are a huge importance in Journey, and it's extremely impressive visually, both technically and artistically. From the vast sun-drenched desert to the bleak, solemn and bitter cold mountain, it's impossible not to feel the need to stop every now and then so you can pan your camera around and take it all in. Journey is also crammed full of neat little visual effects that aid in boosting the amount of immersion the game has to offer. By walking around in the sand, you'll leave little trails and kick sand particles about that glisten in the sun, and it's these elements that make the world feel like a believable space in which to explore. Journey is a game that nearly anyone can enjoy, that delivers an emotional and unforgettable adventure, so if this is one game you never got around to, it's definitely something that's worth taking the time to play. Ground Zero served as the introduction to Metal Gear Solid 5, and although The Phantom Pain is objectively the better game in terms of content and scope, I feel that its prologue was a much more concise and measured experience that delivered a far more traditional take on the Metal Gear series. Set after the events of Peace Walker, it sees Big Boss being called to a black site known as Camp Omega, which is rumoured to be holding his former comrades Chico and Paz, who have been subjected to unthinkable amounts of torture. In terms of gameplay, this is Metal Gear at its best, and quite frankly the pinnacle of action stealth that affords the player an endless amount of ways to approach each of the game's different missions. May that be the quiet and calculated path that relies upon your tranquilizer and outwitting the guards with various different items, to the more action focused with one of the many different weapons you can unlock, like machine guns, C4, rocket launchers and sniper rifles. Now, when it comes to visuals, Ground Zeroes on the PlayStation 3 was a real testament to the power of the console and the Fox engine itself. Even though it's clearly dialed back when compared to its PS4 and PC counterparts with a lot less foliage, shorter draw distances and a lower resolution, it's still an impressive achievement that runs at 720 and hits a respectable 30 FPS. The amount of detail in the game is simply staggering. May that be the environment itself, the weather effects and lighting that all come together to create an incredible atmosphere in the camp, which makes for a truly immersive, albeit short game. If you only ever played The Phantom Pain, then you owe it to yourself to check Ground Zeroes out, and with it now being readily available for a cheap price, it's well worth it. From Software have become one of my favorite developers, with many incredible games under their belt that I'm still discovering to this day. One of them is Gundam Unicorn, that retells the story of the anime and throws you into one of several different mechs as you use their unique abilities to tackle a series of battles. As you would expect, there's a huge amount of customization that the player gets to play around with, and at the end of each mission you're rewarded a certain amount of tune-up points that can be spent on various upgrades, may that be different weapons, armor or skills that all mix up the gameplay when out in the field. Speaking of gameplay, the controls can be a bit overwhelming at first, and maneuvering the huge mechs will definitely take some time to get used to, but once it all clicks, it's one of the most visceral and engaging mech games of all time. It really preserves the feeling of speed that fans of the source material will be familiar with, and with the amount of actions you can perform, it honestly feels like one of the most authentic takes on the franchise. Now visually, Gundam Unicorn is one of the PlayStation 3's most gorgeous games, and like I've already mentioned, that's largely due to the incredible speed that the action plays out. Presented at 60 FPS, it's a really smooth experience, which is only bolstered by the insane amount of detail that each mech comes along with. It's clear to see that a lot of love went into recreating each of the suits and weapons, and when you couple this with the insane amount of effects that light up the screen during combat, each fight becomes a true spectacle. If you enjoy the franchise or just mech games in general, then Gundam Unicorn will be right up your street. Rain is by far one of the most overlooked games on the PlayStation 3, and it's easy to understand why, as it never received a physical release in the West and would instead be tied to the PlayStation Store indefinitely. You take on the role of a young boy who spots a mysterious girl in the rain as she runs from a terrifying monster, prompting him to find her and ultimately bring her to safety. I don't want to spoil too much, as the story is easily one of my favorite parts of the experience, so I'll leave it up to you to discover if you decide to give it a go. Now, one of the first things that will strike anyone who plays it are the completely unique mechanics that the game deploys, which are all built around the rain itself. As the boy begins to explore the city, you'll realize that you're nothing without the rain, and your body disappears upon finding shelter. The various monsters that lurk through the empty streets are also afflicted with the same condition as you, and it all soon becomes a game of hide and seek as you swiftly but quietly move through the alleyways and dodge in and out of the safety of cover from the rain. Now, in terms of presentation, Rain may not be one of the most technically impressive games you can find on the console, but when it comes to its art design, this is where the game truly begins to shine. The desolate beauty of the abandoned city you explore is enhanced by the subdued piano score, which offers subtle background texture without overpowering the other elements. All of the parts that make up the game fit together perfectly, and as the narrative builds to a suspenseful climax, it becomes utterly captivating. Overall, if you're looking for an unforgettable adventure, then Rain is definitely a game worth considering. Ridge Racer has long been one of my favourite racing series, ever since being introduced to the first game on the PS1. Fast forward a few years and it would appear on the PlayStation 3 as a launch title that took full advantage of the extra power the console provided by presenting the experience in a native 1080p resolution, all the while locking the racing at 60 FPS. As many will know, the series is much more of an arcade racer instead of focusing on the hyper-realism you find in hits like Gran Turismo, and it puts a huge emphasis upon drifting and the use of nitro in order to get around the track in the fastest time possible. Of course, you can expect to take part in one of many different modes, with the most challenging being the championship that sees you traveling across the world and fighting several rivals for the #1 spot. Making this all the more enjoyable is the incredible selection of cars as well as parts that can be earned over the course of the season that all offer a noticeable advantage on the track. May that be engine upgrades or different types of nitrous, there's plenty to play around with that's dealt out at a nice pace. So much so that it feels that the game is constantly throwing new things your way, which really helps it from becoming stale. Now visually, Ridge Racer 7 looks incredible even to this day, and that's got a lot to do with the crisp resolution and solid frame rate, but also the design of each track and car. May that be the bustling cities that you race through at breakneck speeds, the calm and beautiful countryside that sees the sun slowly setting behind you, or the reflection of tunnel lights that cascade off the body of your car as you manage to reach your top speed. In short, it's a beautiful game, and of course there are better looking options out there, but for a launch title, Ridge Racer 7 really hit home just how powerful the PlayStation 3 was. Ever since its first release on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, the Dead or Alive series has always been at the forefront when it comes to visuals, and the 5th iteration is no exception. Taking a couple of cues from Dimensions that appeared on the 3DS, the game does away with the traditional arcade mode and instead presents a full-fledged story for the player to dive into. Here you move from character to character and slowly unravel the plot that manages to convey a pretty decent story from start to end. In terms of gameplay, it's the same 3D based fighter anyone familiar with the series will know and love, with all of the characters coming along with their own unique movesets and style. As well as your basic hits like punches, kicks and throws, you also get to perform special moves, known as power blows and critical bursts. These abilities have the potential to flip the outcome of a fight, and even though they require quick reflexes, once you master it, you'll be pulling them off left and right. When it comes to graphics, just like the games before it, Dead or Alive 5 is a truly graphically impressive experience. The character models are by far the best aspect of the visual makeup, with plenty of detail being afforded to each of them, and it's the little details that really shine. May that be the way their hair and clothing realistically reacts to their movement, or the several facial expressions that accompany their attacks. Of course, the stages that these fights play out on are just as impressive, and range from temples to cities and huge stadiums, with plenty of background details that bring life to each and every one of them. Although it's not exactly the best fighting game you can find on the PS3, Dead or Alive 5 is easily one of the best looking. Ever since the first game on the PlayStation 2, Katamari has really stood out thanks to its unique gameplay and quirky style that it can happily call its own. The player takes on the part of a young prince who's looking to help the king return the cosmos to its former glory, and it's no easy task, but by using your Katamari, which is essentially a ball capable of sticking and picking up any object smaller than itself, it'll slowly grow as you navigate one of the many levels and add to its size and weight, ultimately being turned into a new star in the night sky if you complete the stage within the given time limit. It's a simple concept, but it's a lot harder than it initially sounds, as your objectives change from stage to stage. Some see you having to pick up items based on their monetary value, while another might force you to only grab hot items to increase the heat of your Katamari. What really helps the game though is the colourful art style that permeates throughout every aspect of the experience. One quite clever graphical gimmick is that how some stages start out as a black and white outline of the environment, and as you roll over objects and get larger, more and more of it turns into colour. It's a really nice touch, and with the sheer amount of objects you can interact with, it looks absolutely incredible in motion. On top of this, it's all rendered in 1080p, and while the frame rate can be a bit on the slow side, with it occasionally dipping below 30 FPS, it's kind of understandable with the amount that goes on during each run. Though far from a deep and complex puzzle game, Katamari Forever still offers a great time, and with its infectious soundtrack, lovable characters and art style, it's quite hard to put down once you start rolling. There's no denying that Final Fantasy XIII was a bit of a train wreck that no doubt prompted Square to try and salvage what they could by producing 2 sequels, with Lightning Returns picking up centuries after the second game's ending. You wake to learn that the world is going to end in 13 days, and you make a deal with the God of Light to become his servant and rid the earth of the darkness that plagues it, and in return you and your family's freedom is yours. This countdown plays into nearly every aspect of the game that serves as a real driving force and a constant reminder of the dire state of the world. In addition to the main quest, there's over 60 side missions to take on as well, that offer a nice variety and change of pace to help keep the game feeling fresh over the course of its near 30-hour runtime. As you would expect, battles also play a huge role, with the system feeling like a cross between Final Fantasy X and Crisis Core, where you can unleash real-time attacks using the face buttons and wait on the ATB bar to unleash more powerful abilities. Now, for all of 13's problems, the one thing that the game had going for it was its presentation, and that aspect is carried on here quite well. The main character and major supporting characters are beautifully animated, and the different garbs Lightning can wear all feel unique and detailed. This carries over to the areas you explore, from the dense forests to grand cities and deserts that litter the landscape, which provide an impressive backdrop for all of the action to play out in. Even though it's not exactly a traditional entry in the series, Lightning Returns is the better one out of the 13 series, and while it won't be for everyone, it definitely brought the trilogy to a good close. After the absolute mess that was Aliens, Colonial Marines, a lot was riding on Isolation to deliver, and taking a brief glance at some of the reviews at the time of its release, you'd be forgiven, thinking that it didn't live up to the expectations, but I for one truly enjoyed the more basic and old school approach that the game took, which resulted in it being one of the finest survival horrors in recent memory. The game sees you picking up the role of Ellen Ripley's daughter, Amanda, who's on her way to a space station that's said to house the black box of the Nostromo, and possibly some answers as to what happened to her missing mother. Gameplay sees it all playing out from a first-person perspective as you explore the space station and weave in and out of the shadows in the hopes of evading a xenomorph that's running loose on the ship. Ammo and weapons are really scarce, and with the game's combat being purposefully quite hard, it really helps make you feel that you could die at any second. Now when it comes to the game's visuals, it's really hard to understand how they even got this up and running on the hardware, and sure, several corners have been cut in order to do so, but the level of detail is simply stunning when compared to its next-gen counterparts. The space station itself feels like it's been pulled straight out of the films and recreates the atmosphere of them perfectly. The various effects such as the lighting and shadows all work together to make each and every room you explore come along with a severe sense of dread that really amps up the scares and pulls you into the world even further. Although the game won't be for everyone, mainly due to its mixture of both new and old style of survival horrors, any fan of the franchise will find something here to love. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Patty J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.